start at the very beginning in the Principality Stadium, as you rightly point out, in Cardiff on Saturday. It kicked off with a really tight wet weather game between Wales and Scotland that was edged by the hosts. 20 points to 17 to Wales. It was a scrappy game. It was a tense game. It was an interesting game in a lot of ways. And ends in some bitter disappointment for the Scots, who are left not really knowing where to turn. Yeah. And a great win for Wales, who are not going to be lying down anytime soon.
No, this is it. You can never write Wales completely off, and it was only their first home game, and the crowd was raucous, and it was a good atmosphere, and some of their key men, who are very much key men in the context of all the injuries they were highlighting in week one, really did step up in this one and played really well. I thought there was good leadership shown from some of the guys they wanted to show leadership, but then conversely from the Scottish side, you're going, where is the leadership? Where is the calm? There were a fair few errors. It was a wet weather game, which does excuse some of it, but just some of the key handling errors at key times that really scuppered some rhythm and some offensive stuff from Scotland was disappointing. It's now actually not since 1996 that Scotland have managed to win their opening two games of the tournament, so never in the Six Nations have they gone 2-2. And 2-0, I should say. They have gone 2-2, but it's momentum sapping. It's the same story as last year, but with the home and away fixtures reversed. But they back up a historic win against a top side in England and another Calcutta Cup with a disappointing unravelling against Wales. They can't seem to conquer the Millennium Stadium. The other stat we were highlighting last week, not since 2002 have they won in the Millennium Stadium or the Principality Stadium, so that's still something they've yet to manage, and it does set their campaign back a bit.
It was probably a tale of a smart team against a not so smart team, and the matchup was interesting in that Scotland again they were very, very good for large parts. Bits of what they did were excellent. The defence was magnificent. It was unbreached. Apart from the maul try, they were stuffing them in defence. Wales is multi-phase like this. Wayne Pivac attacking Wales. This was a Warren Gatland Wales side, like latter era Warren Gatland Wales win. This game was in the wet weather, won by nous and won by kicking game. But Scotland contained them, and then in bad moments, pretty consistently throughout the game, they gave up sloppy penalties, which allowed Wales to build up. No, it was mostly penalties on the defensive end. They came up with sloppy penalty after sloppy penalty. They were going in, they were competing unnecessarily, consistently trying to force turnovers. Like Finn Russell's yellow card towards the tail end. It was indicative and an example of what they were doing throughout the game, trying to force a turnover. If you freeze frame it and look out, there wasn't anything that dangerous. If Finn just lines up his man, he's probably going to tackle him, it's going to be fine, but he's shooting for a turnover that they don't need to shoot for. They're going for these Hail Mary plays on defence when their defence is playing great. They just need to focus on staying in shape, getting back on side, not giving up penalties. But consistently they let Wales in by giving away really sloppy penalties, losing their feet at the breakdown, going for turnovers that weren't there. And that was, for me, the tale of it. Wales gave up some penalties as well, but when Wales's penalties were good penalties. Wales were stretched. Scotland were testing them. They were getting guys in all over the place. They were coming up on angles, and every time that Wales were stretched, someone like an Adam Beard would come in and just put a hand in there or slow it up or do something, and then sometimes they'd have to concede the penalty, but theirs were always sapping Scottish momentum, whereas Scottish penalties were sapping their own momentum. And so it just felt like a bit of a silly performance from Scotland, and a smart enough one from Wales. And it was definitely aided quite a bit by the wet weather. It played out quite a bit like a kicking duel.
It did, and it was actually at that quite a high level kicking duel, as we were highlighting, between Finn, the axis of Finn Russell and Stewie Hogg on one side versus the axis of Dan Biggar and Liam Williams on the other, and there was a lot of play in the middle third, so a lot of it was decided by that, and there were good moments on either side. To be honest, all four of those players mentioned did have pretty sweet moments, but I think on balance, across the whole course of the 80 minutes, the Welsh duo were the ones that just edged it, not least because of the yellow card. It ended up that Finn threw in that hand, and also then Dan Biggar slotting into the pocket, which was a decision criticised at the time, but I thought it was actually dead on.
It was a consequence of what the Scottish defence was doing.
They weren't breaching it, even though they did have the extra man. They did try for a few phases and weren't going anywhere, and Dan Biggar, being the captain that he was, slotted back and slotted a kick in the rain.
They did have a penalty advantage.
They did, so that's where it is ultimately silly. But slotting that kick and getting it over, and then defending pretty gamely for the last stanza was very impressive from Wales to do that, to be honest.
For sure, yeah. It started, like as it often does, the very first thing that happened is Scotland got like a lovely offensive set going and they were moving the ball really well. It was clean, they had runners coming from all angles, they were putting together great phases, and Wales were defending gamely, like you could see that they were game, and then Darcy Graham picks a sharp line off Ali Price and gets instantly stripped by Liam Williams. They go down the pitch through Owen Watkin and end up getting 3 points of their own. Actually, it should have been a yellow card really for Stuart Hogg, coming in with a deliberate knockdown of his own at the opening of that after Watkins' break. But that leads to a penalty. They take a 6-0 lead. And then actually from there, Scotland do start to impose themselves on the game.
The next 20 minutes of the game really looked like Scotland were the better team, and it was similar to what was playing out in Murrayfield last year, where there were protracted periods where Scotland looked the more composed, more physical and more organised team, but they didn't quite, like they'd scored a lovely try. That Darcy Graham try was an absolute peach to get themselves onto the board, like nice little loop play with Finn, skip pass off the left hand and then back your in-form winger to just do some footwork and finish the try 1v1. Perfect. Like they do look sharp in moments, but then you're right to point out it's just mitigated entirely, or kind of basically sabotaged entirely by sloppy penalty count, by errors in general. I thought both locks, and considering their embarrassment of riches of locks, and guys like Skinner not involved but scoring great.
Skinner was playing at 6 and he was anonymous, but Scott Cummings
is the one who scored a great try in provincial rugby, while the pair of locks that were on the field for them in this one both had pretty bad just drops in the multi-phase. That was again Scotland generating a bit of momentum, and once they did that, they were testing Wales, they were forcing Wales to give penalties away, but unless they just were dropping it cold and resetting the scrum.
I thought they were playing a pretty great game. It was always going to be tough playing offence in that weather. They did ultimately struggle to open up a really tough Welsh defence. I think they were probably there was just a lack really of collision winning and forward runners. One of the things that I would say as well is that it never looks the same without Sam Johnson. I mean, they're so eager at every opportunity to haul him out of there, and I just don't understand why. I think he has a great telepathy with Russell. He picks good lines off him, and I think they were sorely lacking that short, hard cut line to open up the defence and soften up. Like they're so eager to get to the edge, but they were missing that hard cut line, and Hamish Watson did it once or twice in the second half, but it wasn't enough. They didn't get enough front foot going forward ball to actually generate stuff on offence. And then they were also a little wasteful on the free plays, which they got quite a few of, advantages. They never executed any of them. And while they were in that period of the game when they went from 6-0 down all the way to 11-6 up and then 14-9 up, and they were on top for pretty much throughout that period, they had a few more chances to score. They managed to put one try in. They needed to find another, and that's a criticism that you'd have to have. As I thought Russell played a really good game for much of it. In that period, he was getting them in the right areas of the field. He was making good decisions, but they weren't making the magic happen. They weren't getting their guys in space. They weren't opening Wales up. You got to give credit to Wales for that, because Wales
they were very sticky on the defence, and a few guys who had kind of a fire lit under them after the Dublin showing really did show up. I thought Beard as well, who in the absence of Alan Wynne-Jones has to step up in that row, did come to play this week. I thought it was a really good performance from him. The back row as well were dogged and there for the fight, all of them, to be honest, because that Scotland back row had been very impressive again in week 1 against England, and it was some task to try and defuse them, but they did manage to make it oh so scrappy, oh so bitty, and then ultimately edge it, which has been a dynamic of this particular fixture for a wee while. They are a bit of a monkey on Scotland's back now, and they can make that count in those pressure moments, in the last 10 minutes. They know that they can be the ones to just kind of put the ball in Scotland's court and rely on them to kind of,
and they came up with some huge plays as well. I mean, the other thing that, like, the difference between the teams, probably in a nutshell, like, Scotland had more to them offensively than Wales did. They were moving the ball cleaner, but during that sequence when Finn was off the pitch, Wales had a great defensive set that ended a big Dylan Lewis steal, an impact off the bench, but Scotland were going from side to side. It must have been about 10 or 12 phases. And Wales, where earlier in the game, they'd have been a bit stretched and they might have given away a penalty, they didn't give a penalty because they weren't pressured. And that's the thing that Scotland have to learn. I mean, so many cheap points went away and so many cheap positions on the field as well. They did it all over the place because they were impatiently trying to force turnovers. And Wales in that set, without Russell on the pitch, were defensively comfortable. They knew they weren't going to kick it, and they held their line, defended really well, and ended up getting the steal. And it was the same at the end. Jonathan Davis, awesome. It was probably I might have made a comment or something doubting him because he's coming in for his 100 cap, but I wasn't sure about his form, etc. Like, that was a great veteran showing off the bench. It was all defence, but it was great, making reads, and then he makes the winning play on that counter up to turn the ball over.
Yeah,
like,
no, they love him over there. He is a veteran, and he's
awesome.
Worthy of that. Congratulations to him on the caps as well. But it's awesome play. He'll be more delighted with that play because that's what wins and loses matches. That's what these things often boil down to, is just one play like that. And to have a guy like that you can chuck in off the bench with that kind of experience really does help. So Wales played a great game at home and managed to get their campaign back on track with their first win. And as well as that, scupper ideas of Scottish Grand Slams or Triple Crowns and all of that is now gone.
It gets very tough, especially when they've trips to Dublin and a game against France still to go. It does get tough for Scotland. But no, you're right to credit Wales. I mean, it was a flashback to the World Cup. Like, you could see just the all-star quality of Biggar and Liam Williams. And there was a lot of people giving out about Hogg and Russell. Like, obviously Russell has to take the heat for that penalty. It was a really bad one to concede in a bad moment in the game. But actually, for much of that battle, like, it was as entertaining and high level a kicking duel in the wet as you're ever going to see.
There were spirals. Liam Williams had a 50-22 in it. That was a little scutter.
That led to Thomas's Francis' try.
Key moments in the kicking game that were there. And even another kick that was so seminal was Biggar's attempt. It led to the game-ending kind of play, but the long-range kick from the angle that found the post, and then credit to Alex Cuthbert, who was in for his first cap for a while, for chasing up. The ball bounced kindly, he managed to gather it, set up a red zone drive, and then he himself came very close to getting over in the aftermath of that Russell knock-on, just about repelled in the corner, but really good veteran stuff from him as well, because then from that set with Russell off the pitch, they managed to kind of put the squeeze on and edge the game there.
They did, but it was those middle of the game exchanges when I thought Biggar and Williams really did show their class. And to be fair, Williams right from the off, that strip of Darcy Graham. But like Hogg was putting in these bullet low kicks that were really good, that would catch most teams out, and the positional play of Biggar and Williams were great. And then sometimes on the flip side, like a Biggar had the odd loose kick, and Russell's reading of the backfield was really good as well. So it was those two 10 and fullback tandems. Like, the Scots thoroughly outplayed their English counterparts in those jerseys. They touted Smith and Stewart. But they did not outplay. Like, they were very close. It was ding dong, but Biggar and Liam Williams showed and proved why they're world class players, and why it's just so naive to write Wales off as a bad. Like, there's a lot of loose chat that goes around about Wales not being a good team. They have very, very good players, and all of these 5 teams in this championship are razor thin apart. And while Wales can look a little loose and bad on their off days, they have real class and quality, and they showed it in the wet in Cardiff. I think they're it's not quite the Wayne Pivac team of last year. It's a little more Warren Gatlin's Wales. But in the wet, they had the wily.
It's a factor with, I think it's still a COVID protocol, but the Millennium Stadium's roof can't be closed. So sometimes in one or two of those games, you end up on the dry track and you get more of Pivac's Wales. But we don't have that this year at all, and it is these are the February games in the Six Nations. So it has been a wet one. It had been wet in Paris and wet in thing, and it would be wet in Cardiff as well. So they managed to play the conditions and play the game very, very well and get themselves on the board for this year.
Yeah, awesome job to Wales. Congratulations to them. It was a scrappy enough but very compelling game of rugby that did flow on quite nicely. So massive congrats to Wales.
Thank you for tuning in to the Overlap Rugby podcast. If you enjoyed what you hear, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below as well. We enjoy hearing your opinions too. Thank you.